Thanks for joining us tonight. Welcome to Askin' Okie. Tonight's subject matter topic is going to be stream fishing here on Oklahoma's Clearwater streams, focusing primarily on the eastern part of the states, and we can go through how you catch yourself, mainly some smallmouth bass, but we'll talk about getting into other species, good lures to use, what public access to look for, um, and best tips to get you out on the water. Cool thing about stream fishing anywhere, especially with like clear water streams, where you can kind of see what's going on in the water. In a evolving uh, electronics world, technology world, with fishing on lakes or navigable rivers, so much is focused now on electronics that you have on your boat, forward-facing sonar, and there's just not a whole lot of places left anymore where you can really just go get after a ton of fish, blind fishing, and not taking a whole lot of equipment with you and catching a lot of fish and having a pretty good time. So, like any of these asking anglers, they're meant to be conversational and meant to answer the questions that you have. Here on OHA, that's kind of our goal, is highlighting areas that any and every Oklahoma hunter or angler can get to, and tips to be successful when you're there, and answering all your questions. So throw them up there in the chat bar as we go along. We'll get them answered, and otherwise I'm gonna kind of get into it, and we'll kind of do a little loop around the state. Mainly bodies of water east of I-35, all the way from the Kansas border down to the Texas border, and talk about each one of them, where there's good public access to get on, and once you're there, what you should expect to see while you're there, what you might expect to catch, and definitely what you need to use to just catch a ton of fish. Clearwater fishing's awesome, starting about right now. Talk a little bit about spring rains and up and down water levels and how that might affect a trip, a float, and then kind of what you can look for in those instances to help you have success, especially if you're making a drive and don't really know what the water conditions are. And that's a key component of clear water fishing. Obviously, we call it clear water fishing because we want to be fishing when the water's clear. And spring rains, they'll muddy up river systems pretty quickly, and we'll talk about which ones clear out the fastest, where you look for stream gauges to know where the water's at, and kind of what that will tell you as far as sight unseen, whether or not the river is worth making the trip to go fish. And then as we get into the summer, start to get in July, August, September, October, even early November, we really start to run out of those rainy seasons. You can pretty much just base a trip around whether or not has it rained lately, and answer is probably going to be no. So that's when stream fishing really, you can get away, from the lakes. Water gets hot, ponds get hot, they get tough to fish. So great time of year during the summer to just go relax and catch a bunch of fish. So I might kick it off. We'll start just kind of discussing what it is about smallmouth bass in Oklahoma. The cool thing about this state is that we have two endemic strains of smallmouth bass. Most people see smallmouth bass, I think the big bronze, green, dark brown fish, and those are the northern strain, or commonly referred to Tennessee strain. We've got those in the state of Oklahoma, as do most states in the lower 48. They've been stocked out of brood stock. They kind of originate out of the Great Lakes and the Tennessee River Valley, Ohio River Valley, and so they've been used as brood stock because they're bigger sized smallmouth bass, just like your Florida strain largemouth bass. They got a penchant for slow living life. They do well in reservoirs. They can reproduce in reservoirs, but the smallmouth bass that we have in our clearwater streams on the eastern half of the state is pretty cool because they're their own endemic species. They don't get quite as big. They have different markings, different colorations, and have an entirely different lifestyle than their northern cousins. So we'll start down in the southeastern part of the state. So that's going to be our Washita strain. They're going to have kind of a light gold in them. They're going to have a lot of the similar banding that you see in the northern strain fish. Very pretty. The Glover River down in the southeastern part of the state is the longest undammed river in the state. Still not very long, but Most of our rivers and creeks in the state are dammed for flood control, water usage, or other. So very rare. It's the only free flowing river in the state, and it runs right through Honobi, WMA, so it's on public land. You can get a lot of great access to it, and there's a lot of deeper holes in that. It fishes similar to like a Blue River, which is also down in that part of the world here in Oklahoma. And the cool thing about Blue River is it's got Tennessee strain that were stocked in it back in the 80s, and those fish have become a wild fish in the river, so they were able to naturally reproduce. So the fish that you catch there are typically some of the largest smallmouth bass that you catch in the state. And we've got 7 miles of river access to it through the wildlife department, their Blue River public hunting and fishing area. It also doubles as a seasonal trout fishery in the wintertime. And so at this time of year, you want to make a all-day trip out of something, you can get into trout and you can get into some river bass. So with Blue River, we'll start there. That's going to be our one kind of clear water stream that is different than those Washitas and the Neoshos up in the northeast. There's not a ton of them in there for the smallmouth bass. They have kind of a weird environment in there in which it's really kind of waterfall and kind of stair-stepping river environment. So most of the time of year, if it's not at flood stage, those fish have natural barriers all over the river from where they can live. So what you end up with is fish that kind of move through these pockets and braids and end up underneath waterfalls. And those are great places to target them. But cool thing about Blue River is you got, unimpeded access to a continuous stretch of almost 7 miles of river with easy walking access along it. Blue River is not incredibly deep. There's obviously places that are going to be above your head, but for the most part, you can pretty much wet wade that entire river system from, early May all the way in through November. You're going to have water temperatures ranging from 65, 70 degrees all the way up to, the mid to high 80s. There's springs that feed it that keep it a little bit cooler than our prairie streams. And then when you get into the summertime, you're going to get into a lot of spotted bass. The river is just plumb full of spots, but the smallmouth that are in there are really quality fish. You typically catch most of your fish are going to be over 2 pounds all the way up into a 5, 6, maybe even a 7-pound fish. And how you'd look to, target that. And because it's such a cool river environment with these stair steps and pockets, you can pretty much approach that river system by getting into the water. I really like the Desperado Spring area, which is down based out of the campground area. You go into that and go to the main camping area 1 and bend back up the hill, and then you walk down onto the river, and you've got probably a mile plus, maybe 2 miles of river in that, and it's all braided water, so it's really, really small water. Great for light spinning outfits and kind of just work your way up a braid. Averages about waist deep the entire way, and you just work pockets. Anytime that you're fishing river systems, you're looking at kind of 4 main pieces of the river at any given section. You're going to have your dumping and your pool area. So in Blue River, that's going to be where it comes over the little shoals in a small, some of them are pretty good falls, and then that ends up in a pool. And from your pool, that's going to be your deepest area where that water's running in and it kind of churns out the bottom, so it creates a deeper hole. Most of the time throughout the day, that's where your biggest fish are going to be found. They kind of get in underneath that current where it dumps over, kind of churns food up on the bottom. And that's where you can, in a Blue River, you can really throw some heavier jigs, soft plastics mainly, that are going to be in the 1/8 ounce, up to maybe even a 1/4 ounce. But you can throw some bigger profile baits because you're going to have some bigger fish. There's also going to be some largemouth that are mixed in Blue River. So gives you an opportunity to catch some bigger size bass. So medium light, medium action equipment, 6, 8, and maybe even 10-pound test. Water's clear in the summertime. It's clear in the wintertime, but it does have a little bit of that blue tint to it, hence the name. So it does provide a little bit of dinge cover, which means that, you can throw that heavier line without those river fish really being able to see it. So I'm going to kind of walk through what some good baits might look like on Blue River, and these are going to carry over to any of the other bodies of water that we talk about tonight. But for Blue River, because we are probably going to be targeting some bigger fish or the ability to target bigger fish, your offering of size is going to be a little bit bigger than what I would typically suggest for most of the other bodies of water that we're going to talk about outside of a couple. So I'm going to start with the smallest because this is just what's going to get you bit all the time. You're going to catch sunfish, you're going to catch bass, you're going to catch channel cats, you can get into an occasional gar, crappie, lots of different species of sunfish. But I've fished pretty much every wadeable public stretch of clearwater streams in this state over the course of the last 12, 15 years. And the one bait that I found that I have a really hard time out fishing overall in just sheer numbers. Definitely not the go-to for the big fish, although I've caught some of the biggest fish that I've caught on it. So I just consider it a great all-around. I talk a lot when I was with the Department of Wildlife as their fishing coordinator. I talk about it now, doing my more professional career with Bobby Garland crappie baits, but downsizing. It's just really hard for these fish to turn down smaller sized baits. And when it comes to clearwater river fishing in the Ozarks and the Ouachitas in Oklahoma, it's just really hard to beat a really small green pumpkin tube. This is an 1.5-inch tube, and it is it's called a Squirm and Squirt, and it's a Bass Pro Shops brand bait, but it's a green pumpkin base, and it's got some red and black flake in it. But it's only 1.5 inches. I mean, it's not much bigger than your fingernails, so really small. You can buy tube jig heads. They're going to look something like this, where it's a weighted shank that comes down because tubes are meant to be internally rigged. You can run them up to a ball jig head, but they fish a lot better if you put them on a pre-rig. So that's a 1/32 ounce head. That's typically what I like to throw. Gives you a really good slow fall rate. Most of Oklahoma streams, the water's not moving too fast, so you're able to get that small jig. In small water, it's perfect. And then in the bigger holes, you're still able to get it down to depth, get it in the strike zone. But the great thing about a tube is that it just mimics everything. It can be a small bait fish darting around, could be a terrestrial like a frog, can be down on the bottom like a crayfish. It's going to mimic, some insect species, terrestrial insects, grasshoppers, stoneflies, things that these fish see every day. So I love a versatile bait, and it's just really hard to beat a tube when it comes to clear water stream fishing, pond fishing, and a really small size. So with a jig head like this, and you got to internally rig it, that tube is hollow, so you pull the skirt around, and those tentacles, there's going to be an opening, and you just slide that eye hole of that hook, and you just get it started, and then you turn it over just a little bit so it's kind of off kilter up at a 45-degree angle, and you just push that soft plastic down around it until you feel the head of that jig head touch the top of the soft plastic. You'll see there's a little bit of a bulge right there. So you just kind of press your fingers around to give it some tension. That eye hole pops right through. The thing I like about the 1.5 inch, so this bait is made in an 1.5 inch, a 2-inch, and a 2¼ inch. So this is what the 2-inch looks like as opposed to this 1.5 inch that we have rigged up. The body size, where that actual tube body's at, not much difference. It's just a little bit, that extra 1/4 inch is going to come just in the skirt. Well, the problem is that when you're pond fishing or you're creek fishing, you get into a ton of sunfish. And those sunfish, they just have a tendency to peck at the back of the bait. Their mouths are really small. And so they just end up ripping those tentacles off of the end. And you end up, before too long with a bait that is going to start to, look like that. It's going to lose all of its tentacles that got pinched off, and then you'll end up with just a little bit of a nub of that. So I like the 1.5 inch. Keeps them, they're able to get that hook point closer to the back. When they're hitting it, you can get up over. But that little guy right there, in every single clearwater stream, even in your farm ponds, neighborhood ponds, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a bait that touches more fish on any trip at any time of year than this. Not guaranteed to catch you the bigger fish. There's certainly ways to target them that are going to be more effective, get their attention. But if you put that on the nose of a big fish, you're going to have a hard time turning it down. And it's just fun to catch some of those bigger sized smallmouth. You'll even get into non-game fish, your suckers, your carp, river red horse. They'll suck one of those up if it runs along them down on the bottom. So that's my go-to, and those are great because with a pack of tubes and then just a pack of tube heads that go along with them, you can pre-rig them, stick them back into the pack, throw them in a chest pocket, wet wade, clippers, pair of forceps, you're good to go for the day. Like, it doesn't get any better than that. So that's kind of my go-to. Anytime that we go and take a trip, go do a wet wade deal. Only time I really ever bring more equipment than just that is if I'm going to go do a float trip, and we'll talk about some of those areas. So other good lure selections or good soft plastic jigs and grubs and creature baits that you might use on Blue River, and again, this is going to extend everywhere else, are things that are going to match a lot of forage patterns. So in the Blue River, there is a plethora of long-ear sunfish. And long-ear sunfish have that orange base to them along with kind of that teal and green through them. So this, a root beer, green and black pepper, something like that, green and black glitter with this what's called a root beer. You can call it, get a little bit darker, it's a green pumpkin, get a little bit lighter, orange, whatever each brand calls it. But you're looking to just trying to match that base of those sunfish because that's what those river bass are going to eat a ton of. And it's also going to mimic a lot of darters and shiners. There's a lot of that green and black flash going on in clear water. These fish are going to be a lot more vibrant. They get tons of sunlight. They're going to take on all their true hues. So just a 3-inch grub, single tail or double tail, 3 inches and below is usually going to get you bit most often. You're going to catch the widest range of fish. You can jump up into your twin tails, skirted in those root beers. So this is going to be a 4-inch. That's starting to get on the bigger end. You throw that on an 1/8-ounce jig head, work that down along the bottom. Again, grubs, twin tail grubs, skirted grubs, tubes. You're getting a lot of multi-species match as far as prey source goes. And those are just going to be your best options. Anytime you can have versatility in a bait that's going to mimic a lot of things. If they happen to be picky that day, there happens to be a crawfish hatch going on, or there's a bug hatch going on, or there's an overabundance of a certain type of bait fish species. Those types of baits are going to do the best job of mimicking a lot of them. So you don't get pigeoned into, like, if you're running a crankbait or a topwater bait where they got to be really singularly focused on that. So those are kind of the go-tos in Oklahoma for your creek fishing. Some type of 3-inch, 2-inch curly tail grub, the green pumpkins, smallmouth are also kind of suckers for chartreuse. So something like a stroller. It's got kind of a baby shad body, got a green pumpkin body with black flake, and then it's got a chartreuse tail. Those are going to be really good. But that's where you look to start. And soft plastics and jig heads are easy to throw in a really small pocket tackle box, throw them in a bag, throw them back in your pocket. That's the best thing to look for when you go wet wading is how can you limit the amount of equipment that you have on your person when you get out there. It's just going to make life easier. You're going to catch more fish, and you're going to build confidence in it. So that way, next time you go, you're like, oh, I don't need to bring 3 tackle boxes or mess around with the hard baits that tend to get hung up. They're expensive. You don't want to lose that type of equipment. It's just easier to go with the cheap bag of soft plastics. So with that, let me just mention just a few other points on Blue River, good public access. Like I said, it's a public Blue River public hunting and fishing area. So there's a multitude of parking areas and river access throughout the 6.25 miles of river, of shoreline that is owned by the department, flowing kind of north to south. The best smallmouth areas for the bigger fish, definitely on average, going up to the north side of the property off of Highway 7. So those Highway 7 access, you're going to have one on the northwest side of the river, the northeast, the southeast, and the southwest. The two best are going to be the one on the northeast corner and the one on the southwest corner. The one on the southwest corner, there's a trail. You can walk that all the way down to the end of the trail, which takes you down below a really big waterfall. When you get below that, you can hike up the corner of that waterfall when water levels are stable. So usually in the springtime, that's going to be real close. There is some shoreline that you can walk along, but most of the time you're going to be in the water. So up there, you're going to average some of your deeper water. You're going to be in waist to chest deep water. And in the springtime, when we get these rains, you just got to pay attention to the USGS gauge. So for Blue River, that's just going to be typing in Blue River CFS near Connorville. It's going to pull up the USGS gauge. You click on that link, and then it's going to show you the river data. So it used to, on USGS, it started on CFS, which is what you're looking for. Now it shows gauge height. So you have to go down, scroll down, and then click on the bar that says cubic feet per second, the CFS that's coming down. And when you click on that, it's going to show you historical data. So it's going to show you some yellow triangles across that graph. And it's going to show you that at this time of the year, what is the river typically at? That's going to be your stable water level. Then it's going to give you kind of a bar graph that's going to tell you what the CFS is today, and then what the low was in the year, what the medium typically is, and that's going to be your triangles, and then it's going to tell you what the high was for that day. And that's always going to be a flood event. So with Blue River, you're usually looking at CFS not very high, 200 CFS. And if you've got that, it's wadeable. You can go through it. You start getting up 4, 5, 6, 7, 800. There's going to be a lot of water coming down. It's going to be a little dingy, and those places are going to be a little bit harder to fish. So then, if you can't wade it, then you start looking at that northeast corner of Highway 7, where you can walk out onto the big falls on the north side of the bridge right there. And those are good holes. You got lots of different dump-ins from a couple of braids. So it's going to create these different kind of feeding lanes and holding areas for these fish. And when you're in those areas, you can cast straight downstream and work the edge of those seam lines. You can do it with the baits that we just showed. Get it right on the edge of the seam line, let that jig fall down to the bottom, and then you can either just slowly lift that rod up and let it come up and pulse up into the middle of the water table, and then just kind of let it fall right back and bring it up and let it fall back, or you can add in a reel and just kind of keep working that bait slowly up towards you. But anytime you're fishing those bigger, deeper dump-ins, you want to get down like on the bottom of the river. Those fish are going to be sucked down low. And then you kind of want to work the surrounding areas. Is there any slack water? Are there kind of humps that come up to create, bridges in between these different pockets of water? And you'll have fish that will sit kind of right on the shelf. And a lot of times you'll see bass, they'll come up and they'll bust bait fish up into those shallow areas. And you'll see the water boil, and you'll see kind of the bass kind of turn around and go back. And those are just the areas that you're looking to cast in. Blue River's got a lot of down submerged timber in these areas. Obviously, you get seasonal flooding that comes through. It's not a huge floodplain around it because it's not really steep banked, but it's rocky. And so when you get water that flushes through, it's going to move those logs and laydowns, and that's going to create lots of good habitat for bass to sit. And at this time of year, you're going to have trout that sit there. And all the baits that I just showed, those are going to catch trout too. When they get stocked in there, when they get comfortable, they're going to start to learn what to eat that's in there. So they're going to start keying in on the same thing that those smallmouth and those spotted bass and those sunfish look to eat. So throw in a little small tube, green pumpkin, trout have a hard time resisting that as well. So you get a lot of crossover. You can do that. We'll move over from Blue River. Let's talk about Lower Mountain Fork. Lower Mountain Fork is a year-round trout fishery, but that water does get warmer as we start to get into the summer. There's smallmouth bass, there's largemouth, there's spotted bass, there's walleye, white bass, and then you're going to have your stalker that turn into wild. They're able to reproduce in there. Your brown trout, your rainbow trout. So you get a lot of multi-species down there as well. And with that, there's more regulations depending on what you're targeting. So I don't think that you're allowed unless they've changed the regulations. For whatever reason, the department thinks that a soft plastic tube is bait. It's not artificial. So you're kind of limited. You get into the rooster tails or some other things to be able to use for trout. So I don't know what it is. I haven't looked at the trout regs down there in several years. I know it's gone back and forth ever since the big flooding that they had that wiped out a bunch of that trout area. So check with that. But if you can, if they allow you to use soft plastic equipment now in that area and consider it an artificial, definitely be a go-to for trout. You're gonna catch a ton of trout working those little pockets with the little tube. But those black bass and your temperate bass, your white bass, maybe hybrid striped bass get sucked down in through the dam, or they've pushed up out of the red and come up the river, especially down in those lower areas of the mountain fork in the state park, the re-reg dams, deeper, kind of slower runs. That's a good place to work those grubs through, work those tubes through. But down there, because you do have trout, and again, you could use these at Blue River, but it's going to be your inline spinners. So I really like an olive green or a brown. So I believe, like with Warden's rooster tails, they call them their green is what they call a frog, I think is what it's called on the packaging. And that's going to be this guy right here. Just kind of a olive forest green, got a little gold spinner on it. I do know down in Mountain Fork, I think it is barbless hooks, so you'll have to crimp the barbs down with a set of pliers when you're down there. And then the other one is a brown, and they call it I think it's called grasshopper. And you got a couple of them wedged together. There we go. But it's just that little brown one with a gold flasher. So these two right here, a 1/16 ounce. If you fish the deeper holes, or if they're running some water and you get down below those re-reg where you might be in, maybe up to 8 feet of water, just adding a piece of split shot to get it to fall down. And then a tip with inline spinners, because that blade rotates around the main shaft of the lure. It's not offset. So you do have to get some water disruption to get that blade to continually spin. So a quick way to do that is just a flick of your wrist when it hits the water, almost like a real kind of short strike hook set, and you'll feel that tension of the blade get going. But those are good ones. And you can use that in any clear water stream. Rooster tails are great. They mimic bait fish. Bait fish and terrestrials that are moving quickly through the water, maybe have a little shine to them. Those are always good, but you've got a treble hook on, and with hard baits and things like that, I just feel like you're just more effective if you stick to soft plastics. But if you wanted to use a hard bait, an inline spinner in an olive or a brown, those are going to be really good color schemes throughout the Clearwater. They eat a ton of like darters and chubs, all your predatory species, and those are going to be mixtures of brown and olive and darker colors because the water's clear, so these bait fish are more vibrant. Then you always have the option of going with the color contrast, so white in a Clearwater stream, especially dying shad, dying bait fish, they start to take on more of like a ghost profile. So twin tail grubs, I like a fluke or some fluke style of bait. So your flukes are going to be, they got that little fork tail, or like a caffeine shad, any yum minnow. There's so many different brands that sell, different styles of, kind of a fluke style body, either with a fork tail, a bumper tail, or some type of hybrid style tail, or your twin tail grubs or single tail grubs in white. Obviously with the grubs, you're going to use a jig head more than likely, but like with a fluke, great thing about a fluke in a river system is you kind of want to keep it high up in the water column anyways. So just taking an offset worm hook. So 3/0, 4/0, 5/0, wig it weightless, wig it weedless. So the belly of the bait's that little deep part right there, and you just pull it through the nose, pop it out through that bottom on the belly side, and then you work that bait up to the top. And then once you get it up to the top, you spin it so that that belly is now facing the belly side of the hook shank. And then you just run that hook point up through the top to where it comes through. And then we're just going to pull that soft plastic forward and let it bury back in on that hook point. And that right there, for on the Illinois, the Mountain Fork, the Blue River, low light conditions, tossing that up along banks, backsides of seams, or even just running it all the way across the river. That's going to stay high up in the film. So you're essentially fishing, a top water plastic. It's not going to sit out of the water, which is better. It's going to sit kind of down in the film. And the great thing about a fluke or any type of swim bait, big swim bait, 3, 4, 5 inch swim bait, whether it's got a split tail, a paddle tail, as that water hits you, you kind of cast it cross current, maybe a shade upstream, but as you work it in, it's going to give it that back and forth action like a Zara spook or a Zara puppy, those walk the dog style top waters. But it's going to sit more down in the film, and it's going to just tantalize with that tail, and you get some really big blow ups doing that in the Mountain Fork, especially in the low light hours, early morning, late evening, even into dark. You can get some big brown trout come up. You're going to get your big predatory bass species to come up for something like that. And that's really as big as I ever get in a river system, is going to be like a 4 or 5 inch fluke style bait in white, work it across the top, and use that kind of as my top water in those low light conditions. And then if we're on the subject of top water, walking style baits are going to be the easiest to fish when you're in moving water, because the water's doing some of that work for you to help you, kind of kick it. If anything, you don't have to work it twice to get it to go pop, pop. You kind of pop it once, and then it goes, and then the river flow takes it back the other way. So really, you only have to pop it once, then it turns, pop it again, turns, pop it again. So top water, either propeller style baits, like a torpedo, little baby torpedo. It's got the little wheel on the back. You can kind of run that across and also give it that. It's got that Zara spook, Zara puppy body style. It's just that round kind of torpedo body, but it's great for walking across the top. And then your true walking across the top baits, the Zara puppy, and then the bigger one's going to be the Zara spook. Got some of these tangled up in a box together. And you can throw a trailer on these. These are good for white bass in your river systems, especially at this time of year as they start to look to kind of come up to the surface. You can tie on a little hair jig or soft plastic back behind it. But just something like that. It's got that nose on it, and it's just going to kind of kick across the surface. But your soft plastic fluke's going to accomplish the same thing, and you don't have treble hooks laying down in the water just in case you might want to run it across some flooded grass, or you might come across the top of a laydown. Low light conditions, you might not see a branch that's just right under the water, and those treble hooks will grab them. So I don't use a ton of hard baits, if at all, anymore when I fish river systems. But crankbaits, jerk baits, topwater baits, any of those hard plastic baits that are going to have treble hooks on them, kind of use at your own peril, just because these types of environments where these fish like to live, a lot of times there's going to be a lot of opportunities to foul those lures up on snags, either on top of the water, just under it, or down towards the bottom. So soft plastic's the way to go, especially if you can rig them weightless and weedless, and then you can really just kind of work them through the water column, or really small profile baits like this where that hook point isn't very imposing, less you're able to just kind of work it through cover without it getting hung up as often. So with Mountain Fork, definitely if you're going to go after those, warm water species, the evening hole area, so basically the water that's in between the 259 bridges, that can be good as we get later into the year. At this time of year, if you want to go after those bigger predatory species that aren't trout, you probably want to get a little bit farther downstream, in between the re-reg sections or down below the re-reg section. It's going to give you more water. Like I said, there's some big aggressive browns down there. You get the walleye, you're going to have temperate bass, you're going to have black bass mixed in, but that's a good spot. Now, if you go up to the upper Mountain Fork, up above Broken Bow Lake, there's a couple of public access that you can get down, but up there, Panther Creek, that's a good place to put like a kayak in, especially if there's low to stable flow. You can work your way back up towards towards the shoal, the riffles that come in there, the first couple of shoal pools, and then there's the narrows that you can park next to, but that's really skinny water. But if you put it in at Panther Creek, there's a couple of creek options that you can go up in a kayak right there. That's public access. It's kind of a drive to get in there, but that's really good. Starting this time of year, you're going to get those Kentuckys that are up there, that spotted bass. You're going to have a mixture of smallmouth. The white bass are still going to be up there. Walleye like to spend a lot of time in that area. And then obviously your largemouth bass in that lake, along with the spots. They're going to be mixed in there all year long. So those are two good spots. And then right next to it, you got Honobi, WMA. So you got the Glover River. That one just requires you to get, if you're a resident, you got to get a $40 permit, annual permit to be able to fish in there. But there's a lot of creeks on that property in addition to the Glover that are going to offer you kind of solitude. So if you really want to get away from the crowds, get away from Mountain Fork, get away from Blue River, get away from the Illinois, Honobi and the Glover is going to offer you a lot of great opportunity to go find some really cool pieces of pocket water that's public access that you can wade up or down, and then all the other little tributary creeks that are on the property. And again, it's just really hard to outfish the little tube. So those are kind of what covers your southern half of the state. There's what's called Rock Creek that runs into Arbuckle right behind Veterans Lake, just north of Arbuckle, cuts in through the Chickasaw recreation area there, and you can pull in down behind Veterans and kind of walk that. There's a trail that runs along the creek, but you can kind of just hop into the water and wet wade it all the way down until it gets too deep. You'll get to a point where you essentially have to make the decision if you want to swim to keep going, because there's a couple of good holes, but the trail's right there as well, as it makes the big bend to go into the north end of the lake, and you can just hop right back up onto the old road and just walk the trail right back up to where the parking area is. Outside of that, there's not a ton of public access down there. You push up towards Poto, you've got like Lee Creek and areas like that, but just not a ton of public access. So if you know people with private access, those are great creeks to get into, but Oklahoma is really limited on its creek fishing. So taking advantage of the little bit that's available to you. We're going to cover them all tonight, and then if you got any questions, you want to plan the trip after the live feed's over with, you want to watch this, throw your questions up, we'll answer them. This is going to be an ongoing discussion of river fishing from now until early November. So you get a really good good window of good fishing available to you on public access, where you can go catch some quality fish. You can definitely go catch quantity of fish. So really makes for a great weekend trip. Take the family, go by yourself. You can make any one of these public access creeks work for what it is that's going to be your fishing trip when you can get out on the water. So let's push up out of the southeast. We'll start talking about some of the Ozark areas that we have to offer, which is going to be the east central and the northeastern part of the state. So the Ozark drainage is going to be your cobble bottom that's coming in out of Missouri, coming out of Arkansas, and that's going to be feeding 10 killer. It's going to be feeding Grand Lake systems. So you're going to have mainly the Illinois system is the primary one. The great thing about the Illinois is you can go out there during the heart of float season when there are 1,000 rafts out there on a Saturday, middle of July, and you can still go catch 50 to 100 fish. A mixture, mostly going to be smallmouth, but got the opportunity to catch big sucker fish. You got the opportunity to catch, spotted bass, largemouth bass, gar, crappie, and then all different sorts of sunfish species. But the Illinois is really good when the float traffic isn't on it. That's when you can really start to get into some of those bigger quality fish. And the cool thing about the Illinois system is that historically it is a Neosho smallmouth stronghold. Well, they stock Tennessee strain into 10 Killer Lake. And they also have stocked them into Grand over the years by both, lots of different parties. And so in the Illinois system, what has happened, and we've really seen this in the last decade, is those Tennessee strain fish that live up on the north end of 10 Killer, they'll push up into that river system during their spawn season. They don't have to. They can spawn in the lake if they want to. But instinctually, a lot of those fish are going to take more preferred sheltered habitat up in the river system. So what we've seen is kind of this development of these hybrid fish, these Tennessee strain mixed with Neosho strain, and they're getting the best qualities of both parents. You're getting this Neosho strain they want to live in the river. They don't want to live in the lake. You won't find those Neosho strain down in 10 killer. They want to live up in the flow. That's the riverine environment that they want to live in. Those Tennessee strain, well, they can live in the river system and certainly down around Horseshoe Bend and all the way up to the 62 Bridge. During the summer, not a ton of flow coming down, plenty of water for those fish to be able to step up and move. They're going to get a little bit cooler water in a shallower environment that they might not get in the lake that's going to warm up a little bit quicker. So it's going to offer them some refuge during the summer, just like stripers do in the lower Illinois during the summer. So we've got this crossover. Well, it's great because now what we're looking at is all the way up into the middle section of the river, which is the true float section of the river for the commercial floats up there during the summer, the swimmers and the rafters and all that, is we're starting to see really quality 2, 3, 4 pound fish that are not Neosho strain purebloods anymore. Those Neosho strain, a big one is like a 3 pounder, would be like a world-class Neosho strain fish. Those fish live from 8 inches to 16 inches. That's where they live. And those Tennessee strain, they can get all the way up into the 20-inch range, 20-plus range. So when you start mixing those genetics where you get a fish that can attain greater sizes but still want to live in that riverine environment, it creates a tremendous fishery for anglers that is really underutilized. And that's, the reason for doing a course like this is, number one, let people know that there's great, spots in the state to go target fish in really clear water. Go catch a lot of different species. But there's also a few places where you can go catch really quality fish that you might make a trip to go up into the Ohio Valley or the Allegheny up in the mid-Atlantic, going up to the northern part of the Mississippi up in Brainerd, Minnesota. Things that are kind of bucket list trips for people, anglers down in the south, to go catch those smallmouth in their native riverine environments and catch really quality fish. All, like, by and large, you're still not going to be able to create that same type of, fishery, but we're certainly getting closer, and a system like the Illinois has the most amount of float access, gives you access to a lot of different water throughout the course of, tens of miles, from the upper stretch at the state line at Arkansas all the way down to Horseshoe Bend at the lake. This time of year, definitely when it's not flooding, down below the 62 Bridge is a really good float down to the Tahlequah branch. There's a public takeout right there. You can get into really big fish down there at this time of year. You've got the Tennessee strains that are pushing in from the lake to spawn. You've also got the bigger hybrid riverine smallmouth that live down there as well. And then the stretch that goes out around Sparrowhawk. So the big bend that also doesn't get heavy float traffic. That's another good one in the summer because most people, they don't make that big stretch around. There's a lot of frog water. If you got any wind, you really got to be able to paddle. So those are two sections of river that don't see a ton of float traffic or angling traffic. And by and large, you're going to have the opportunity to catch bigger sized bass in that section. But the middle section of river, which is considered the commercial float area, essentially Chewy Bridge down to whatever it is before it makes the turn, Arrowhead, War Eagle, those ones before it goes around the bend to Sparrowhawk. That section of river was always known for really good numbers. You go up there and catch a lot of 8 to 14 inch fish, which are good quality fish. They're going to give you a ton of play. Twin tail grubs in the Ozark streams have always been a dynamite, just soft plastic for those bigger fish, those 14 to 18 inch smallmouth, which are going to run anywhere from 1.5 pounds all the way up to 4, maybe even 5 pounds, just depending on whether or not they're a Tennessee or a hybrid or even some of those bigger Neoshos. Twin tail grub is really going to get you some really big bites. But again, in the Illinois system, throwing the little tube, you're going to pick off all those little ones too. So you're going to just up your numbers at the end of the game. So for a float, it's great because if you got a kayak, even a raft, typically I'll rig 2 rods up. I'll have one with like an 1/8 ounce jig head on it with a bigger profile bait, either a skirted twin tail or a twin tail with the option to be able to switch out with some type of grub. Um, and then if I've got the opportunity to fish it really early morning, late evening, I'm going to have a pack of some offset hooks and a big 4 or 5 inch fluke. But that's it. It's going to be really condensed. I'm only going to have 3, 4, maybe 5 different baits, 3 different types of hooks, and that's it. That'll all fit into a little chest, pocket style. Even something like this is a little too big. You can get them into the real small tackle boxes that'll fit right in your pocket. One thing about river fishing, especially wet wading, is you try to not get your tackle wet, especially your hooks, because if you forget about them, throw them in the truck, throw them in a backpack, they sit out, you're going to rust your hooks out, you rust your equipment out. So always best to, if you can put them all into a Ziploc bag and seal them up, or you've got them in a little tackle box, make sure when you're done fishing, just open up that lid, maybe dump them out onto a towel or a paper towel, let them dry out, and then throw them back into the box. And you should be good with your equipment, and you don't need much. You can build the perfect Oklahoma River box essentially with 4 baits and put them into one little tackle box, and we'll show that, and then we'll kind of move up into the public access floats of the Illinois and time of year, and definitely what to look for on that river. But if I could go build a perfect tackle box that would fit into my pocket, I would get some type of swim head, and you can really even get away with like a Ned style head if you need to. You can swim a Ned head. But my 3 hooks would be a 32nd ounce hook, tube hook, let's see, even a 64th. Anybody fly fishes out there, I love taking a little 3-weight fly rod, especially on like Barren Fork Creek, and I'll kind of do hybrid fly fishing, and I'll throw a little tiny tube on like a 64th ounce tube head, and it flies just as good as a dry fly. Drop it down, give it a couple of quick strips, let it swing through, and catch a ton of fish that way. But some type of heavier Ned style head, 1/8, 1/10, somewhere in there, just something that's going to be able to get down to the bottom if I want to drag the bottom with like a skirted or a twin tail. So those would be those 2, and a Ned style, hook. And then some type of offset hook, 3, 4, 5/0, and some flukes that I can rig, weedless and weightless. And then just some little tubes, 1.5 inch, 2-inch tube. Then rig it up. And that's it. So everything you'd ever need to catch river fish of any species in Oklahoma is going to fit, in the palm of your hand. So all that's going to fit nicely into just a little pocket tackle box. And if you can do that, it's some of the most fun fishing you can have, because it's simple. You've got the opportunity for quantity and quality, which that's hard to do anywhere. I mean, you can't even guarantee that in a pond on some days. But the great thing about a river environment is that these fish have to eat. They're in moving water, so even though they look to live, when you look to read water, they want to sit in the softer water. So as you get real strong current, they'll sit back on a tail out, and they'll kind of position themselves where that water's flowing right off to the edge of it, where they can look to attack food that's made it that far. In runs are going to be areas where the water level is consistent, so depth is pretty consistent, flow is pretty consistent. Then they're just going to be looking for things that break up the current that's in that environment. So that's going to be woody laydowns, undercut banks. If there's a drop from a gravel bar, there's tons of those on the Illinois. Little ditches that have been dug out from flooding that are in those runs. That's where those bass are going to sit. And then as you push up into where the dump in from a tail out turns into a pool to start that next section of river, then you're going to have fish that are going to sit right at the base of that dump in. So essentially that water, they're going to be sitting right down here. Your gravel is going to work its way up from them. And as that water dumps in over the top of them, it kind of just does this churn above their head before it starts to find its way back into the moving channel. So they just sit down, and essentially it just chews up food. It's an easy feeding lane for them. And then if there's any type of structure associated with the pool, rocks that are on the bank where the current goes to, they'll sit down at the base of those rocks. Some of them will sit up on top of the rocks. And so you just kind of fan cast and pick apart any part of the river looking for those things. And then the deeper we get into the summer months, you're going to look for areas that have some moving water. So seam lines become more important. Shaded areas, that could be water that's this deep, can hold some of the biggest fish in a section of river if it's offering food conveyor belt, shade, all the things that they're looking to hunt in. And that's kind of what you're looking to key in on. So on the Illinois system, you're going to have that kind of mid-section float, that mid-river float, which is typically like Round Hollow down to Peavine. So right next to Peavine is going to be Arrowhead, which is the resort that's there with the cabins and tent camping and RVs. So if you're looking to go over there, great place to camp, because then you can drive up or just take the shuttle from Arrowhead and go up and dump in at Round Hollow, float down. It's about a 3-hour float. You can turn it into a 5-6 hour float, especially this time of year. Not a lot of commercial floaters out there. And then if you go downstream and you're looking to go out around the corner, then you're looking at putting in more like it at a Stunkard, and then floating all the way down around to like Sparrowhawk. And then you can do big around the turn. And then the other good one is like the 62 bridge put in, and then you float down river to the Tahlequah branch, and there's a takeout down there. For that one, you either need to have 2 vehicles with you to shuttle, or you got to call. There's lots of the river outfitters you can call into town, lots of people who run shuttles to go park your truck down there so they can drop you off and your vehicle's waiting for you when you get down there. But that's a really good, section of float. From that, Barren Fork Creek is probably the coolest stretch that we've got in the state for just an overall experience of going and wet wading, because you've got really shallow water, so it's great for kids, dogs, lots of different, able-bodied people. Really shallow gradient, slow moving water, flows usually averaging like 120 CFS. Deeper water is going to be maybe shoulder deep for most people. So it's a pretty safe environment when it comes to a river. But you've got a ton of fish, and it's almost exclusively smallmouth bass. Not a lot of bycatch. There is some rock bass in there. There's some sunfish. You will catch those occasionally. But pretty much you're just catching Neosho strain smallmouth bass, which I think is cool when you live in a state where you have this endemic species. You have public land, easy access. You can pull your carts down onto the river, set up lawn chairs. There's a quarter-mile, half-mile of river right there you can fish at the Bamberger WMA, and that's going to be in Proctor. So it's about 10-15 minute drive east of the 62 bridge coming out of Tahlequah. So it's great to turn like a weekend into 2 different types of fishing, where you can go fish Barren Fork Creek, or you can float to Illinois one day. So you can kind of mix up a 2-day trip over in that area, really close to Tulsa. I mean, you're 45 minutes, an hour away from Tulsa. Oklahoma City, you're 2.5, 2:45. So not incredibly far. So most people in the state who live up the I-35 corridor, southeast, northeast, can get to that area within 3 hours. And that's pretty reasonable for pretty good fishing from right now all the way through October, November. So like I said earlier, you get into the dog days of summer, it's hot. It's like, I don't want to go sit down at the lake. Then you can get out there, it's spring fed, it's flowing water, it feels great. There's, big steep kind of canyons, so that sun really isn't up above you too much of the day. You can get in shaded water. Great place to learn how to fly fish. So a lot of growth in fly fishing in Oklahoma in the last decade, especially for warm water species. And it's a great place to learn. You got ample flooded, riparian zone area, so the floodplain that's in there, really shallow gradient, not a lot to get hung up on. You can be out in the middle of the creek, you can be up on the bank, and you got tons of casting distance. So taking a 3-weight, a 5-weight, it's about all you need. You don't need anything bigger than that. Short leaders, 7.5-foot leaders. You can tie tip it on or not. Like I said, I mostly, instead of throwing flies, I'll just tie on tubes and throw them out there just like streamers and just work them through and cast them upriver 45 degrees. That's exactly how I would fish it if I was using spinning equipment. Toss it up, let the current do the work for me, keep slack out of my line. So if I've got a spinning reel, I'm usually just picking up the slack and giving it an occasional, like, real subtle rod tip pop just to kind of keep that bait moving and darting. But I want to be able to kind of occasionally feel it bounce the bottom and work it across. Same thing with the fly rod, casting it out, floating line, upriver, letting you get a big bow in the line, which you typically don't do with, nymph fishing or dry flies, where you want to keep a good upriver mend and keep that big downriver bow out of the line so you get a natural drift. Well, with river bass, even if you are throwing a dry fly, great fly fishing, you can take a big hopper stimulator and smack the water with it, because they're looking for frogs, they're looking for injured bait fish. They are not nearly as finicky as trout are. So if you're trying to learn how to fly fish in Oklahoma, it's way better to go learn in the summer in better conditions, where the water's clear, where it's hot. You don't have to put waders on, very limited equipment, and you can get out there and catch a ton of fish and learn the principles of fly fishing that you're going to need for trout, but learn them in an environment where you're getting positive results. Because if you go and do those same types of things on a trout stream, by and large, you're not going to get bit and you're going to be spooking fish. So you can kind of go dial in your casting skills on Barren Fork, especially at the Bamberger area. There's a new one that the department acquired a couple years ago. It's called the Barren Fork WMA, and that's over just outside of like Westville, which is almost on the Arkansas state line. The access in there is okay. It's just hard to get down on the river. They've done a better job of kind of creating a trail, just depending on seasonal flooding makes it different of how you're going to get in the water. The first year that it was open, that was a big bank, so you had to go through big grass areas, and those are areas you kind of want to avoid during the summer, especially in Oklahoma. Snaky areas, long grass, kicks, chiggers. Easier to get right down into the water. You're safe in the water, walking through all the grass and stuff like that. So the last time I was at Barren Fork WMA, it was a little bit easier to get on it. I fly fished it last summer. It was great, caught a bunch of fish. But it is a tighter area. It's tighter casting. You can still make those casts. They're going to be more upriver standing in it. Barren Fork's going to allow you to fish both directions with going perpendicular to the flow, which is a big benefit if you're learning how to cast for fly fishing. But you can't beat it. It's hard to just go get a pack of 64th ounce Squirm and Squirt tube heads and 1.5 inch Squirm and Squirt tubes and green pumpkin, red and black flake, pre-rig them up, and you get a pack of 15 tube heads, get a pack of 15 of the tubes, pre-rig them, throw them in your pocket, nippers, forceps, and a fly rod, a 3-weight with floating line. It's a ton of fun, because occasionally you hit a good fish. Occasionally you'll hit a 14, 15-inch fish, which is like, whoa, I mean, that's going to turn. But all those little 6 and 8 inchers, they're going to give a 3, 4, even a 5-weight fly rod. They're going to give it a really good run. And that's really the draw of river fishing, especially for smallmouth bass, is just pound for pound. They are incredible fighters. They don't give up. I mean, you hook so many more fish than you land. Even the little ones. It's like, if you don't keep tight line on them, they're going to figure out a way to get that hook out of their mouth somehow. Even when they gut hook it, sometimes you can go to pull that hook out and it's way down in their mouth, and they've already kind of shook that hook point free. So that's just kind of the draw of going and getting them. And there's several opportunities in the state. There's great opportunities in our neighboring states if you're looking to get out of state for a camping trip over the summer. Crooked Creek in northwestern Arkansas, the Kings River, get up into southwestern Missouri, just outside of Joplin. There's lots of creeks that run into like Table Rock Lake. There's great access in and around eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, southwestern Missouri. So you're never too far from just really quality stream fishing, no electronics, limited gear, high catch rates, opportunity for good quality fish, in environments in which you're just not likely to see a ton of people unless you're floating the Illinois during float season. And then it's just a matter of picking off all those tail outs and shaded woody areas as millions of rafts are floating by every day. Those fish just suck out of the water that looks good and goes and finds their way over to the shallow water banks where there's woody laydowns, tail outs, overhanging trees that provide shade. And you can go find 10, 12, 15 fish stacked up on each other in a really, really small area. So great opportunities to look for. If you got any questions, please throw them in the chat bar for this video once it posts. We're came up on an hour, so we're done for tonight. Anybody who watches, we've got a discount promo going. I'll throw it over into the chat bar here, so this can be used. This can be used at any time up until June 30th. So if you're looking to renew your tackle, go ahead and you go to lurenet.com, and then you're going to plug in at checkout OHA 40, and that'll give you 40% off. And it's a lot of great tackle on there, but if you're looking for like some really cool creek gear, Great Lakes Finesse has got a little snap craw and now a juvie craw. Those baits are absolutely incredible. So if you're looking for, you want to kind of go a little high dollar on your fishing with something that's super durable, they're going to have that green pumpkin matte finish. Really, really good baits to work along the bottom of any of the rivers and creeks that we talked about, but especially the bigger ones, the Blue River, the Illinois, the Glover. You can go catch some pretty quality fish. And then there's all the classics on there. Anybody in Oklahoma knows, like Rebel, Crick Hopper, Head and Top Waters. So go ahead and go to lurenet.com, use that OHA 40. If you become a member of OHA, we'll plug your email address into LureNet, and you'll get that 40% discount as long as you're a member of OHA. But that discount that's up here now, OHA 40 on LureNet, that's going to be good until June 30th. So take advantage of that, get yourself some fishing equipment, and get out there and enjoy Oklahoma and what it's got to offer. And throw us a message, throw a comment up in the bar below this video, and we'll get them answered, because we're coming into that time of year. And I can't stress enough, if you love to fish, if you haven't fished that much and you're looking for public access, but lakes are intimidating, you don't know where a pond is, these clear water stream access over on the eastern half of the state, they're going to go a long ways towards just, making you excited about going fishing, because you're going to catch a lot of fish. And occasionally, depending on where you're at, you're probably going to catch some pretty good fish. So go out there, get after them, stay safe, pay attention to the weather, don't get caught out there during the storm. And I think next week we're going back to turkey hunting next Monday night, and then we'll be back to fishing on Asking Okie in a couple of weeks. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.